Undercover owner saw Waitress, struggling in his diner. What, he discovered, left him stunned. Emily Parker's right hand was bound in stiff white bandages, yet she still carried plates stacked high against her hip. Each step across the crowded diner sent a jolt of pain through her wrist, but she forced a smile as if nothing was wrong. Customers noticed the strain, some whispering sympathy, others shaking their heads at the cruelty unfolding in plain sight. The counter. Victor Hale smirked, as though her suffering were entertainment. His voice cut sharp across the room. "Pick it up, Emily. Do you think this place runs on charity?" The sting of his words drew uncomfortable glances from nearby tables, but Victor thrived on the spectacle. He wanted her humiliation to be public, unforgettable. What no one in the diner knew was that her injury wasn't clumsiness at all. It wasn't an accident. And the man sneering behind the register carried secrets far darker than anyone suspected. Emily bore the brunt of his temper, but the truth stretched well beyond spilled drinks and slow steps. At a corner booth, an older man stirred his coffee in silence. His name was Samuel Grant, though to everyone else he was just another retired regular wasting hours over eggs and burnt coffee. But Samuel wasn't what he appeared. As he watched Victor's every move, his sharp eyes caught what others missed. Something wasn't adding up. And soon, this quiet presence would become the one force Victor never saw coming. The smell of frying bacon lingered in the diner like a heavy curtain, clinging to every booth and uniform. Morning rush meant endless coffee refills, plates clattering, and orders shouted across the counter. In the middle of the chaos moved Emily Parker, her face calm, her movements precise, even though her right hand was bound tightly in white bandages. She balanced trays with her good arm and carried mugs pressed against her hip, but every movement came at a cost. Pain flickered across her face whenever a plate shifted too suddenly. She fought to hide it, because in this place, weakness was an invitation for Victor Hale to strike. Victor leaned against the register, pretending to check receipts, but his eyes never strayed far from Emily. His taunts came like clockwork. "Faster, Emily. Customers are waiting." Then, louder, so the entire diner could hear. "Clumsy again? I swear, you spill more than you serve." The words sliced deeper than the pain in her hand. At table 4, 2 women in crisp business suits bent closer to whisper. One shook her head. She should not even be working with a hand like that. The other sighed. Victor will never ease up. He seems to enjoy breaking her down. Emily heard them. She always heard the whispers. Some pitied her, others criticized her, but none of them knew the truth. They did not know why she never stayed home to rest, why she pushed through the ache, why walking away was never an option. Rent did not wait. Bills did not pause. Survival left her no choice but to endure. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck as the morning dragged on. Her good arm throbbed from carrying trays alone, the muscles straining under the extra weight. When she paused at a booth with a soft smile and whispered, "Enjoy your meal," Victor appeared like a shadow. She turned too quickly, bumping into him, and a glass of water spilled across his shirt. The diner fell silent. Conversations halted. Forks hovered in midair. Victor leaned close enough for her to smell the bitter coffee on his breath. "Clumsy. Again?" His tone dripped with mockery. Customers shifted uncomfortably. One muttered under his breath, "Give her a break, man." But Victor ignored them. His grin widened, a private sneer meant only for her. He was not angry about the water. He was reminding her of control, of power, of what he had already taken from her. Weeks earlier, the truth had revealed itself by accident. Emily had been cleaning tables long after closing, humming softly to keep herself awake, when Victor's voice carried through the thin office door. He laughed about money missing from the register, bragging about how easy it was to take a little off the top when no one checked the books closely. At first, Emily thought she heard wrong. But as she pressed her ear closer, his words sharpened into undeniable truth. Victor was stealing. That same night, he caught her standing in the hallway, frozen in shock. She would never forget the way his eyes burned with fury, the way his hand shot out and twisted her wrist until something cracked. The sound of bone giving way echoed louder than her scream. She dropped to her knees, gasping, but Victor only leaned close and whispered, "Clumsy, huh? Better keep it that way. One word about what you heard, and you lose more than your job." From that moment, the bandage on her hand became more than an injury. It became a warning, a mark of silence. And now, with every passing shift, Victor made sure no one doubted his version of events. He filled misconduct forms with her name, writing her up for every trivial mistake. Spilled drinks, forgotten orders, a supposed bad attitude. Each false report stacked against her like bricks in a wall, trapping her in a corner she could not escape. Emily endured because she had to. But inside, the weight of it all pressed harder than the trays she carried. Nights were the worst. When she returned home to her small apartment, her hand throbbed so fiercely she could barely lift a glass of water. She wrapped it tighter, whispered a prayer into the silence, and forced herself to rest before the next shift demanded more from her than she had to give. Through it all, she held on to one fragile shield, her smile. Customers saw it and believed. She was fine. They did not see the tremor in her arm when she carried too much weight. They did not see how her eyes watered when she bent her wrist the wrong way. They only saw the brave face she gave them, and that was enough to hide the storm brewing underneath. What Emily could not know was that someone had been watching her closely. Not just today, not just this shift, but for weeks. From the corner booth, Samuel Grant stirred his coffee, eyes sharp beneath white brows. He noticed the way she flinched, the way Victor's cruelty always landed on her, and the way the customers whispered when they thought no one was listening. Samuel had run businesses long enough to recognize patterns, and something in this diner did not add up. He saw resilience in Emily's quiet endurance, but he also saw a truth hiding in the shadows. Victor's cruelty was not random. It was targeted. And the deeper Samuel looked, the more certain he became that Emily Parker's suffering was only the surface of something far darker, waiting to be uncovered. The morning after her long and humiliating shift, Clara stood by the cracked mirror in her small rented room. Her injured hand was wrapped in an old cloth, trembling whenever she tried to move her fingers. The diner's fluorescent lights had burned her eyes last night, but it was Victor's cold laugh that echoed in her mind more than anything else. She had faced insults before, but something about last night felt different. It was as if the world had conspired to strip her of even the smallest fragments of dignity she had left. She wanted to believe that she could endure it all, as she always had. But the truth was brutal. Her body was giving up. Her once steady hands that used to paint tiny flowers on her sketchbook now shook even when she lifted a glass of water. Clara had worked herself to the edge of collapse, and she could not deny it any longer. That morning, Samuel entered the diner earlier than usual. He sat at the corner booth, not as a stranger passing through, but as a man who had chosen to see beyond the mask he wore. His eyes rested on Clara as she wiped the counter, struggling to hold the rag steady. Her pain was visible, yet she kept moving, determined to keep her weakness hidden. Samuel noticed how Victor passed by her with a smirk, muttering words that were meant to pierce her spirit. The turning point began with something subtle. Samuel, still disguised as a traveler, ordered a simple breakfast and waited patiently. But when Clara brought his coffee, her hand slipped, and the hot liquid spilled on the counter. She gasped softly, apologizing again and again, as though she had committed a crime. Victor swooped in immediately, his voice sharp and mocking, and "You even hold a cup properly," he sneered loudly enough for the whole diner to hear. "Maybe this job is too hard for you, or maybe you are just too useless." Clara froze, her cheeks burning. She wanted to defend herself, but her voice failed. The other customers turned their faces away, pretending not to notice, because silence was easier than kindness. Samuel's hand tightened on the fork in front of him. For weeks, he had watched Victor belittle her, but today, something shifted inside him. The cruelty was no longer something he could ignore. He leaned forward, his voice calm yet heavy with authority. Enough. The single word cut through the tight room like a blade. Clara's eyes widened as she turned toward him. Victor laughed, trying to brush it off. "And who are you to tell me what to do in my diner?" Victor challenged. Samuel's eyes never wavered. "I am someone who has seen enough to know when a man crosses the line." The air thickened. Clara's heart pounded as she watched this mysterious man stand against Victor with such certainty. For the first time in months, someone was willing to shield her from humiliation. That moment alone was a spark of light in her darkness. But the true turning point was not just Samuel speaking up. It was the way he shifted the power dynamic. He pulled out his wallet, not to show off, but to lay down a quiet truth. Inside was an old card, faded, but still clear enough to reveal the name Samuel Whitmore embossed in silver. Victor's smirk faltered. The name was one he had heard before, whispered in small business circles, attached to stories of a man who had built and lost fortunes, who carried a reputation both feared and respected. Clara caught the flicker of recognition in Victor's eyes. She did not yet understand who Samuel truly was, but she sensed that this man was not ordinary. Samuel slipped the card back into his wallet without another word. He had said enough. Victor cleared his throat, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. For the first time, Clara was left standing without his shadow pressing down on her. She stared at Samuel, her mind racing. Why had he done this? Why had he risked Victor's wrath for her sake, a waitress whose name barely anyone remembered? That night, when the diner finally emptied, Samuel lingered at the counter. Clara approached hesitantly, unsure of what to say. Before she could speak, he looked at her with steady eyes. "You deserve better than this," he said quietly. "Do not let a man like him convince you otherwise." The word struck her deeper than she expected. No one had said anything like that to her in years. People either ignored her struggles or dismissed them as unimportant. But here was a stranger who saw her, who reminded her that she still had worth. Clara went home that night replaying Samuel's words. They did not erase her pain, nor did they heal her injured hand, but they planted something inside her that had long been missing: hope. A fragile, uncertain hope, but enough to shift her heart from despair to the faintest possibility of change. That was the moment her story began to turn. Victor leaned back in his chair, the smug smile on his face sharper than a blade. He had grown too comfortable throwing his weight around inside the diner. Every insult he delivered felt like a test, as if he wanted to see how far he could push before Clara broke. Clara's burned hand ached with every movement, yet she pressed forward, delivering plates and refilling cups, as though her pain did not matter. But the humiliation she felt whenever Victor's voice echoed across the diner left marks no one could see. Customers shifted uneasily whenever he spoke. Some tried to hide their discomfort by staring at their plates, while others exchanged quiet glances, silently questioning how much longer the bullying would go on. Samuel watched all of it. His expression never changed, but his mind sharpened with every moment. He had been here before, in boardrooms where young executives tried to prove themselves by ridiculing others, in gatherings where people used cruelty as a mask for weakness. He knew the type Victor represented, and he knew how dangerous men like him could become if no one drew a line. The tension deepened when Victor began calling Clara names. He mocked the way she held the coffee pot with her bandaged hand. He exaggerated her movements, mimicking her limp with cruel exaggeration. A few customers laughed nervously, unsure if staying silent made them complicit. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to disappear into the kitchen, but walking away would mean letting him win. Instead, she forced herself to continue serving tables, each step powered by the fragile hope that the night would end soon. But the night was far from ending. Victor leaned closer across his table, his voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Tell me, Clara," he said, tapping the table with one finger. "How does it feel to serve people who are better than you? Must be hard knowing this is all you are good for." The words stung. Clara froze for a moment, gripping the edge of a tray. She tried to keep her composure, but the truth was harder to bury than she expected. Her dreams of becoming a teacher had been shattered by circumstances beyond her control. The diner was not her dream. It was survival. Samuel noticed the way her shoulders stiffened. He noticed the slight tremble in her bandaged hand. Inside, he felt a quiet storm building. Still, he stayed silent, letting Victor reveal the full depth of his cruelty. The other workers exchanged nervous glances. Mary, the older waitress, whispered to Clara when she passed by, "Ignore him, honey. He is not worth it." But the whisper only fueled Victor's arrogance. "Oh, they are giving you pity now," Victor sneered. "That is all you will ever get. Pity." The weight in the room grew unbearable. Each insult Victor hurled was not just aimed at Clara. It struck the dignity of everyone who had ever struggled, everyone who had ever felt invisible. Clara kept moving, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. The hardest part was knowing that she could not afford to lose her job. If she lashed out, she risked everything: her paycheck, her dignity, her already fragile sense of security. Victor, sensing her restraint, grew bolder. He began snapping his fingers at her like she was not human, like she was just part of the furniture. "Coffee. Now," he demanded. "Do not make me wait." The sound of his snapping echoed, sharp and demeaning. Clara's heart pounded as she approached his table. The tray wobbled slightly in her weak hand. She could feel everyone watching, waiting, wondering how much longer she could endure. When she set the cup down, Victor leaned back and gave her a smile that held no warmth. Then he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "You should thank me. No one else even notices you." For the first time that evening, Clara's mask cracked. She looked him straight in the eye. Something inside her shifted, a quiet resolve, fragile yet unshakable. She did not respond, but her silence carried weight. Victor saw it, and it unsettled him. Bullies thrived on reactions: fear, anger, tears. But Clara's steady gaze disrupted his rhythm. Samuel caught that look too. It was a spark, faint but undeniable, the kind of spark that could grow into something powerful if given a chance. But Victor was not finished. He waved the bill in the air when it came time to pay, holding it between two fingers as if it were contaminated. He waited until Clara reached out with her burned hand before letting the money fall slowly to the floor. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Clumsy me." The diner fell silent. The insult was sharp, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Clara bent down, her face burning with shame as she picked up the bills. Her hand throbbed with pain, but she forced herself to rise without a word. Victor's laughter broke the silence, a sound so cold it made even the air feel heavy. Samuel set his fork down. For the first time, he spoke. His voice was calm, low, but it cut through the diner like a blade. Enough. Every head turned. The man in the corner who had been silent all night had finally stepped in. Victor's laughter faltered. He narrowed his eyes at Samuel, sizing him up. "And who are you supposed to be?" he sneered. Samuel did not answer immediately. He let the question hang, let the silence stretch. He knew timing mattered more than words. And when he finally spoke again, his voice carried authority that silenced even the faint hum of the jukebox. "Just someone who has seen men like you before. And I know exactly how they end. The diner held its breath. Something had shifted. The conflict had risen, past the point of return. Clara stood frozen behind the counter, her good hand pressed against her apron to stop it from trembling. The diner felt different that evening, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Victor leaned against the doorway, his smirk wider than usual. His friends filled the booths with loud laughter that carried the sharp edge of mockery. Every sound seemed meant to remind Clara of her place, small, broken, powerless. She tried to focus on the orders in front of her, but the pain in her injured hand flared with every plate she carried. The bandage was stained from the day's work, and though her hand throbbed, she kept moving. Stopping was not an option. She knew Victor was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It came when she set a plate of food in front of his friend. Victor stretched out his leg, blocking her path, forcing her to stop. The room fell into a tense hush, broken only by the hiss of the fryer in the back. "Tell me, Clara," Victor said loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Does that hand still hurt? Or are you just pretending to get sympathy tips?" His words cut through the silence like glass. Clara's face flushed hot, and her voice caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, Victor added, "Maybe you should show us. Take off the bandage. Let everyone see if you are really as weak as you act." The demand was cruel, humiliating. Clara's chest tightened as she glanced around. The customers were watching, waiting, some with pity, others with curiosity. Her body wanted to disappear, but something inside her resisted. For days, she had swallowed her pride, forcing down anger to survive. Tonight, though, her silence felt heavier than ever. Her eyes lifted and locked on Samuel, who was sitting quietly in the corner booth, as he had every evening. He'd always been just another customer, never speaking more than a polite thank you. But tonight she thought she saw something in his eyes, a spark, a warning, or perhaps encouragement. She could not tell, but it steadied her. Clara drew in a breath. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the room. "My hand is injured, yes, but weakness is not the same as brokenness." She did not unwrap the bandage, nor did she step back. Instead, she met Victor's stare directly. For the first time, his smile faltered. The diner seemed to lean forward, as if every soul inside felt the shift. Victor's tone hardened. "Careful, Clara. Do not forget who runs this town. One word from me, and you will be out of this diner for good." Something in Clara cracked open then, not in defeat, but in defiance. Her voice grew stronger. "You do not run this diner, Victor. You only think you do." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Whispers rippled through the booths. Victor's jaw tightened. His pride stung in front of his friends. He shoved back his chair and stepped closer until he stood over her. The tension was unbearable. Samuel rose quietly from his booth. The motion drew every eye. He walked forward, calm but firm, his presence cutting through the storm. He stopped beside Clara, placing himself between her and Victor. "You have said enough." Samuel's voice was steady, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "Sit down, Victor." Victor's eyes widened, confusion flashing into anger. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" Samuel's gaze did not waver. "I am the man who owns this diner, and I have been patient long enough." The revelation sent a shock through the room. The laughter in the booths died instantly. Victor's confidence faltered as he looked around, searching for support, but his friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Samuel's words had landed, like a hammer. Clara's breath caught. She had suspected Samuel was more than he appeared, but to hear it aloud filled her with both relief and awe. Samuel continued, his voice calm but unyielding. "I have watched you come in here night after night, using cruelty as if it were your right. This place is meant for people to find comfort, not fear. and I will not allow you to poison it any longer." Victor tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "You cannot just throw me out. Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Samuel said. "I know exactly who you are. That is why you are finished here." With a nod, Samuel signaled to the kitchen door. Two men stepped out, workers Clara had seen before but never paid much attention to. Tonight, though, they moved with certainty, positioning themselves beside Victor. The message was clear. The entire diner sat in silence, the moment stretched tight. Then, in a burst of frustrated pride, Victor slammed his fist against the counter. "This is not over." Samuel's voice was final. "For you, it is." Done. Workers guided Victor and his friends out, their protests fading into the night air. The diner remained still for a heartbeat longer, then released a collective breath. The threat was gone, but the weight of what had just happened lingered heavy. Clara stood rooted, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the release of holding herself together for so long. She turned to Samuel, searching for words. He met her gaze, his expression softer now, but filled with something she had not seen before. Recognition. "You did not need saving," Samuel said quietly. "You stood up on your own. I only gave you the space to finish it." Her throat tightened, emotions crashing together. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt something stronger than fear. She felt seen. The diner, once a stage for her humiliation, had become the place of her defiance, and Samuel, the man who had watched silently from the shadows, had revealed himself not just as the owner, but as someone who understood the weight of cruelty and the courage it took to face it. The moment had shattered the old order. Nothing would return to the way it was before. The courtroom was silent, yet the silence was not heavy anymore. It carried warmth, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm has passed. Ethan stood frozen, his back slightly bent, his calloused, hands trembling by his sides. He had lived through years of invisibility, and now every pair of eyes was fixed on him with respect. For the first time in years, Ethan did not feel like a janitor. He did not feel like a man whose worth had been stripped away by time. He felt seen. He felt honored. Judge Thompson broke the silence. His voice was steady, but there was emotion in every word. "Mr. Walker," he said gently, "today you reminded us all of what true strength looks like. You are more than your uniform, more than the floor you clean. You are a man who gave everything for his country, and for that, we owe you more than words can ever say." The gavel rested on the desk, unused. This was not a moment for law. This was a moment for humanity. Ruth, standing a few rows back, wiped her eyes. She had known Ethan as a quiet man who worked late hours, never asking for much. She had guessed his life carried weight, but she had never imagined it carried history like this. In that moment, she promised herself she would never let him fade into the shadows again. One by one, people in the courtroom began to clap. It started soft, almost hesitant, and then grew into a thunderous standing ovation. The echo filled the room like a heartbeat. Lawyers, clerks, even strangers rose to their feet, applauding not just a man, but a legacy. Ethan's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. His throat tightened, his eyes burned. He simply placed a trembling hand over his chest, nodding, again and again, as if his silent gratitude was louder than any speech could ever be. Judge Thompson stepped down from the bench. Slowly, he walked towards Ethan. Every step carried reverence, as though the judge was crossing a sacred space. When he reached him, he extended his hand, but then stopped. Instead, he raised his right arm in a military salute. The entire courtroom gasped. A judge saluting a janitor. It was a sight no one would ever forget. Ethan's knees weakened. His chest swelled with a pride he thought he had lost forever. With effort, he straightened his back and returned the salute, his hand steady despite the tremor of his heart. At that instant, time seemed to stand still. It was not about rank or position, not about wealth or status. It was about honor. It was about one man finally being recognized for the sacrifices he had made, for the years he had carried silently on his shoulders. When the salute lowered, Judge Thompson placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You are not forgotten," the judge said softly, "and you never will be again." Tears slid down Ethan's cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. For the first time in decades, the burden of invisibility lifted from his soul. As the crowd continued to clap, Ethan's mind drifted to the long nights he had spent scrubbing floors, the loneliness of holidays spent alone, the times he had questioned if his life still held meaning. And now, in this single moment, he understood. It had all led here. His story was not one of failure. It was one of survival, of quiet resilience that finally found its voice. Ruth moved closer, gently taking Ethan's hand. "See," she whispered, her eyes shining. "The world knows you now. They see who you really are." Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice cracked, but he managed to speak. "I thought I was forgotten. But today, I feel alive again." The courtroom did not see a janitor walk out that day. They saw a veteran, a hero, a man who carried honor in every scar, in every wrinkle, in every step, and Ethan himself walked out different. The weight he had carried for years was lighter now. His heart, once weary, now beat with renewed strength. He had not only been acknowledged, he had been transformed. The sun was setting behind the courthouse when Malcolm stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. For the first time in years, the world felt lighter. Not because it had changed, but because he finally believed he belonged in it. Sarah walked beside him, holding his arm with pride. A crowd had gathered on the steps, neighbors, strangers, even the same people who had once whispered behind his back. But now, there was no whispering. Instead, they clapped, they cheered, they called out his name. Malcolm's heart swelled, but he stayed humble. He knew this moment was bigger than him. It was about every person who had been silenced, every worker who had been overlooked, and every soul who had been told they were less than they truly were. As he raised his head to thank the crowd, an older man stepped forward. His suit was worn, his eyes heavy with years, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Malcolm," the man said, "I once worked in the same factory as you. I was too afraid to speak. But today, you gave me courage. You reminded us that even the quietest man can carry the loudest truth." Tears stung Malcolm's eyes. He shook the man's hand firmly, realizing that the ripple of his courage had already begun to spread. Sarah leaned in, her voice trembling but strong. "Dad, today you did not just change your story. You changed mine too. For the rest of my life, I will tell my children what you stood for." The words struck deeper than any applause. Malcolm did not need statues or awards. He had something better, his daughter's pride and a legacy of truth. As they walked away, the courthouse bell rang, echoing through the town like a final seal on the day. And though Malcolm Carter was once known only as a janitor, from that day forward, he was remembered as something far greater, a man who stood tall when the world tried to keep him small. And sometimes, that is the most powerful victory of all.